So thank you for joining us today. Thank you for being part of this spiritual community. We know you have lots of choices in this hybrid world we live in, and we're delighted you chose to be with us today. This morning, we wrap up a month-long focus on grateful living. But do we really? One of the intriguing reminders that has floated up in my world this week has been an online conversation around this Thanksgiving story that most of us learned as kids, which probably doesn't actually represent what happened way back in November of 1621. The other thought that occurred to me as I pondered today's talk is how bizarre it is that we only focus on thankfulness or gratefulness during one season. And I realized in earlier eras, thankfulness for the autumn harvest was a big deal because it meant there was going to be food enough to survive the long, dark, cold winter months when very little could be grown and harvested. And yet, when we look at other cultures around the world, both currently and historically, thankfulness happens year-round. It happens in planting, it happens during the growing season. It happens at all of the different times when things are harvested. Celebrating the harvest happens year-round. And so for us to actually focus in on it just once kind of shortchanges this idea of gratefulness, doesn't it? And so for us as humans, we notice this thing we call goodness, or we notice this thing we call celebration and appreciation and recognition of goodness, mostly when we contrast it against something we consider as not so good or less good or maybe even bad. A couple years ago, not long after I moved into my townhouse, I had a new appreciation for running water because the city had a busted water main. And so the whole southwest part of town was without water for 4 days, which was crazy. I mean, other than hurricane season, I hadn't experienced anything like that. And we had been without water for 4 days, and they were bringing water in and stuff, but it was a very long time to walk up to the tap and turn it and have nothing happen. And it seemed positively miraculous to me when the water came back on. And you remember, now that we're all wearing sleeves again, what it was like during the summer when you'd come in from the blazing heat outside into your cool homes or your cars or in public places. When we'd walk in from this sweltering heat and it would be almost chilly, and we'd be grateful for the coolness until we had to go get a sweater because it was too cold. And then there's the gratefulness for health. Nobody wishes to be ill, and we don't wish illness on anyone. But there's nobody that appreciates vital, vibrant health more than someone who has experienced severe or chronic illness. And I could go on. The list is really huge. Sleepless nights contrasted with sleeping through the night, being hungry versus eating good food, feeling lonely contrasted with feeling loved. We have all of these experiences of appreciation that are made stronger by contrast with something that's not so nice. So for us, it's this practice of paying attention or noticing or recognizing the good that surrounds us and is always present. And we have to decide to see it. We have to pay attention and we have to act in a way that we recognize that we are seeing this goodness. It can be something as simple as stopping for a second to appreciate a sight or a taste or a scent. Or we can just blow it off, and we can stop and pay attention. It's all up to each one of us to decide whether we actually participate in our lives or whether we're just kind of oblivious to it because we're so busy. This experience of gratitude, of gratefulness, of appreciation is always available to us, and we have to decide to make the time to participate. So there's another idea that I want to remind you of briefly. And I'm fairly sure most of you, if not all of you, have experienced something like this before. And it's a story that Thich Nhat Hanh wrote about that happened to him in January 1963. I found the story this week on his Facebook page. He went to the library to pick up a particular book of philosophy. And when he entered the philosophy room, there were only two elderly gentlemen sitting at a table reading. He found the book he wanted. He sat down in the chair and he read for a while. And then suddenly he was startled by the distinct aroma of grapefruit blossoms. He was in New York, so it's not like there were grapefruit trees anywhere within 1,000 miles of New York. And he'd been away from home so long that slightest scent or slightest sound of Vietnam was precious to him. And to him, that scent of grapefruit was the fragrance of home. He was so taken by this scent of grapefruit that he couldn't really explain, that he wasn't able to read. And after thinking about it, he reasoned that the fragrance couldn't actually be real, that it couldn't be coming from some grapefruit tree someplace. It could be somebody's perfume maybe, but yeah, it probably was his imagination, some memory that had floated up from his subconscious mind. He had had similar experiences in the past. And he returned to reading. But then again, there it was, this unmistakable fragrance of grapefruit. Flowers, you know the smell, it's different, right? And he looked at his book for a whole 5 minutes, drinking in the scent and afraid to look up, but unable to read because he was so taken with this remembrance of the scent of grapefruit. His explanation was, as a novice, he was required to read Buddhist philosophy. And he was barely 16 and he didn't really understand what he was looking at. But it was complicated ideas like interdependent co-arising and the singular oneness of subject and object, things that we talk about in foundations class. How do we integrate this idea that there's a bunch of us, but there's really only one, and we all come at it together, and we're all interconnected and interwoven, and we feel like we're separate, but really we're only one. And he reasoned that all phenomenon, Vietnam with her flowering grapefruit trees and orange trees, her coconut palms, and the lively city of New York where he lived, with its sun and snow and clouds and moon and stars, were all found in his own consciousness. They were actually concepts. They were ideas. His world, including all his friends and all his future readers, of which we are, all the grapefruit trees and starfruit trees he had ever touched or thought about were ideas that were found in this oneness. He wrote, "When you read these lines, will you see me in them? This city, as well as my thoughts and feelings, will then become concepts in your mind, in your consciousness. For you, these concepts are not the result of direct experience with the objects of my consciousness. They can't be. Void of physical reality, these concepts are shared through this medium of consciousness. We call that subjective mind or collective unconscious, but it's this idea of there's really only one, and each one of us live in it. And we experience life in that presence, in that place of one mind. It's a handful, right? And yet it's actually what I think is probably very true. For me, this experience has happened a couple of times in my life. The scent of gardenia is one that comes to me now and then. And when I smell it, it instantly takes me back to January of 1985, when I stood in a plant nursery in Darwin, Northern Territory, Australia, one early morning and breathed in that heady aroma of this crazy plant that makes these insane flowers and this wicked good smell. And then separately, a number of times, the scent of rose has shown up in my experience, not when I was around any rose bushes, but just randomly, intermittently, briefly, over many, many years. And I know this has happened to other people too, if not rose and gardenia, other things, other scents. Maybe it was baking bread. Maybe it was cigarette smoke, who knows? But it's something that we pull out of our memory and our body experiences it as though it were happening now. And it's actually something that's happening in our consciousness. Right? And we can be grateful for the memory. We can be grateful for the experience. We can be grateful to remember that there's only one and we're all in it. So which way of viewing the experiences of goodness that you have in your life serves you best? For me, it's remembering all of the events and experiences of my life with a grateful heart and mind. And the same is true for difficult and challenging ones. We can focus on the difficult experience, the difficulty of the experience, or we can focus on the good that came of it. And I know that in the moment when it's happening, when the hard thing is happening, it's not possible to see the good. I get that. And when we look at it later in the rearview mirror, there's almost certainly some benefit, some good thing that can be found from even the most challenging of experiences. I'm going to repeat an Emerson quote that I've used several times this month because it's just so rich. Cultivate the habit of being grateful for every good thing that comes to you and give thanks continuously, because all things have contributed to your advancement. You should include all things in your gratitude. And then a quote from Dr. Holmes that I haven't used in a while, from a little book called It's Up to You, page 76, paragraph 2. Everything is all right this minute, if we only knew it. This is true, and at the same time, it's not true. It's true in principle, so far as reality is concerned. Nothing more will ever be provided for our good than has already been provided. But that which is true in principle is only as true in practice as we make it. Though we are surrounded by beauty, for instance, only as much enters our consciousness as we allow to enter, only as much as we can appreciate. Even though this all good is ever available and immediately responsive, we have a part to play in bringing it into our experience. Above all things, we must know definitely and consistently that the universe is for us and not against us. So now we're going to let the magic of the Zoom room break us up into small groups to talk about our experience of gratitude for about 10 minutes. If you're somebody who really likes to talk, please make sure to let the other people in your group talk first. And if you don't know each other, please introduce yourselves first so you know who you're talking to. 10 minutes goes by quickly. There will be a countdown clock that shows up at 1 minute. And if you don't want to go to a Zoom room, you can stay in this room with me. We're still going to talk about gratitudes after I give some instructions to people who watch later on YouTube. So now I'm going to open the Zoom rooms and let's see how it goes. Breakout rooms, there we are, good. So if you don't want to go to a Zoom room, you can hang out with me, but we're still going to talk about gratitudes, okay? So here we go. When it says join, please join. And if you don't want to join, you can stay here and talk to me, that'd be fine. Pop, 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 as people go away. We'll see who stays in and talks to me. Okay, so I need to move this out of my face so I can see who I'm talking to. So for people who are watching this later, I'm going to pause the video, talk about gratitude, talk about how you appreciate and experience life gratefully. Now I'm going to pause this and talk to the people who are in the room with me, assuming I can remember how to do that. Pause, record back on. How was it to talk to each other?
It was wonderful.
Good,
Mm-hmm.
good.
I agree.
And to share the gratitudes of being, right?
Mhm.
All as much as you can, like as wide as you can touch and as wide as you can imagine. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's fabulous when we take the time and pay the attention to do that.
What always amazes me is that I find out things that I didn't know about myself when I start opening my mouth up.
And we start talking and it's like, I didn't know I thought that.
Yeah.
So I only have 2 more things to say before we put a bow in this part. And that the first is a poem by George Eliot, which of course is a woman named Mary Ann Evans Cross. Oddly, we keep her as George Eliot, but her name is really Mary Ann. And it's 2 stanzas. And I'm going to read the first stanza twice. You'll understand why after I do it. The first stanza. If you sit down at set of sun and count the acts that you have done, and counting, find one self-denying deed, one word that eased the heart of them who heard, one glance most kind that fell with like sunshine where it went, then you may count the day well spent. But if through all the livelong day you cheered no heart by yea or nay, if through it all you've nothing done that you can trace that brought a sunshine to one face, no act most small that helped some soul and nothing cost, then count the day as worse than lost. So it's a question of what she focuses on, right? I'm going to go back and read that first stanza again. But if you sit down at set of sun and count the acts that you have done, and counting find one self-denying deed, one word that eased the heart of them who heard, one glance most kind that fell like sunshine where it went, then you may count that day well spent. And then a quote from Melody Beattie that is a typical one we talk about during thankfulness time. Gratitude unlocks the fullness of life. It turns what we have into enough and more. It turns denial to acceptance, chaos to order, confusion to clarity. It can turn a meal into a feast, a house into a home, a stranger into a friend. It turns problems into gifts, failures into successes, the unexpected into perfect timing, and mistakes into important events. It can turn an existence into a real life and disconnected situations into important and beneficial lessons. Gratitude makes sense of our past, brings peace for today, and creates a vision for tomorrow. So practice gratitude. Be aware of it in all the ways you can. Bless yourself and bless us all. Thank you. So now I want to roll into the prayer. And if you've learned something to be grateful for, or thought of something to be grateful for, some practice or remembrance or expression or experience, hold that in your mind while I speak these words of affirmative prayer. I know that one life, that divine life that shows up as me, also shows up as everyone. That one heart, that one joy, that one peace, that one delight, that one goodness that runs through me and through all. And I know each one of us accesses this at our choosing, at our deciding, even though we're swimming, standing knee deep. No, swimming in a great giant lake of magnificent wonderfulness. And we get to decide to see it that way. Living in this bounty, in this beauty, in this delight. I get to notice, I get to see, I get to experience and express. And that same truth happens for each and all. So I relax into this goodness and know that the gift already has been given. And I get to decide to access it, to own it, to live in it, to experience it. And I know that same truth for and about each and all. So I relax, knowing it's not a chore, it's not a heavy lift. It's a joy. It's an opportunity. It's a way of seeing life more abundantly, more gloriously, and to be in it, and to know it is good and very good. So I relax into it and I let it be. And so it is.